Donald Trump was several weeks ago interested in using his pardon power. That apparently was just a brief hobby of his because he doesn't seem to talk about it much anymore. But if he gets back on it, I would prefer if he doesn't just pardon like actresses that he knew and people who hosted cooking shows and boxers and things like that, although some are justified.
Essentially people who do not need pardons.
People who do not need pardons whatsoever. And so Brooke has been compiling lists of people who actually deserve it based on injustices in in their past. And so now, it's the second edition. Who should be pardoned?
Right, because essentially he asked for help. He's got a little help from Kim Kardashian. He asked the kneeling NFL players in the midst of their peaceful, might I add, protest for help. He wanted, while he was uninviting some of them to a White House visit that they had already decided they didn't want to go to. But neither here nor there. We do have a list of people. I want to just kind of quickly go down the list. So first up is Pharrell Scott. He is 55 years old, that's him. He is serving life in federal prison without the possibility of parole for a non-violent drug offense. Not only that, specifically it's possession and conspiracy to distribute, guess what?
It's gotta be crocodile.
It's a life sentence, right? So it's gotta be heroin and meth, and no, it's marijuana.
So here's the thing, like I keep hearing that libs are lying about marijuana, like life sentences and people staying for long periods of time, that's an exaggeration. But he's never getting out of prison. Never,
for the rest of his life, unless his only option to get out of prison is clemency. His only option.
For, again, non-violent, no violence whatsoever, possession and conspiracy to distribute.
Absolutely, something that-
A substance that's legal in multiple states now.
Multiple states, and something that the feds have decided to somewhat turn a blind eye to and let the states decide and police it.
So it is entirely possible that someone could smoke marijuana and then go visit him in prison.
Absolutely. It is entirely possible that someone could smoke marijuana and then become the president of the United States.
That's possible. It's never happened, but it's possible, maybe someday.
Right, okay, next up, Yuka Wadlington, 52 years old. All right, so sentenced to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole for also a non-violent drug offense, but specifically in this, 0 drugs were ever actually handled. So and this is, I wanna break this down for you. So he was not actually accused of selling actual drugs, just trying to. Because this is what happened, this is an interesting and awful story, but for months, he used to be, was a small time drug user. He had changed, a drug dealer. He had changed his life. He was not doing that anymore. He had a good job. For months, a former friend who was working undercover for the feds had been trying to get him back in the game. And for months he said, no, 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 no. So he was begging him to sell drugs again. And eventually he agreed. He owed the man some money. The man who was working undercover, he owed the man some money and wanted to use these drug proceeds to pay it off. So he shows up for this drug deal. I think they said he had $3 in his pocket at the time, but he shows up for this drug deal. And of course it was a ruse, it was set up by the DEA, it was set up by the federal government. He was never actually caught with any drugs, but because he agreed to sell them and showed up for the deal, he was arrested. A fake deal, by the way. He showed up for a fake deal.
He got 2 life sentences.
2 life sentences.
Can you imagine how many life sentences he would have gotten if he'd actually sold drugs? So I'm not a lawyer. I've heard of attempted murder. Is attempted drug dealing a thing?
Isn't that crazy? It's conspiracy to sell drugs.
And 45% of the country would hear what you just said and say, yeah, he belongs in jail.
Yeah. Absolutely, well, they would. 55% would look at him and say, "Yep, he belongs in jail," before hearing anything.
Pardon him,
please.
Instantly.
Okay, so next up is Antonio Bascaro. He is 83 years old.
Okay.
And he is, if not he is definitely one of the longest serving federal inmates doing time on marijuana charges. This is important. He is not serving life without parole, but he is 83. So he's been in prison since 1980. Interesting about him, he's not a US citizen. And he's not a low-level drug dealer at all. This was a massive operation. It was marijuana. And he's a Bay of Pigs vet, so he's not an American citizen, but he worked for the CIA.
Yeah.
He is his case is too old to qualify for recent compassionate release programs. So his case is too old. He's older, but his case is too old to have him benefit from some of the things that protect people that are his age. Those were enacted after he went into prison. He is scheduled to be released in the summer of 2019 when he'll be 84. So, and as he and his family point out, if he makes it.
Yeah, if he makes it. I assume the fear is that 83-year-old, were he to be released now instead of next year, would murder dozens.
For sure.
I assume.
For sure.
I assume.
That's the fear.
Yeah.
Do we have time for the other two? Okay, Christopher Holyfield, 49 years old, serving life without the possibility of parole for conspiracy to sell 50 grams or more of crack cocaine, but possession of 3 grams or less of crack. So obviously we have the conversation here. We've probably had it 3 times. The differences between punishment for crack and punishment of basically
cocaine.
Crack minus baking soda, cocaine.
Yeah.
And it's a nonviolent crime. Problem is he does have minor drug arrest before this, which makes him technically a career offender and not generally eligible to even have clemency discussed.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they would say in this case at least it's not marijuana, I guess. But again, it's okay. Yeah, crack is bad, and people do it. It happens. And yet we live in a country where I could get 3 bottles of vodka, I could drink all 3 and I could die that night.
Right, crack is no
totally
different
legally.
than
Not illegal in any way.
cocaine.
Exactly.
It's just the people who
you take something that's illegal, you add something that's perfectly legal, and it becomes more illegal. I don't understand the legal math on that.
Patricia Clark, 46 years old. So this is an interesting story too, but first-time offender serving life without the possibility of parole. Her and her lawyers both point out that it was understood at trial that she was a mule, a girlfriend to one of the kingpins in this, but has serious charges due to conspiracy guidelines. So basically she was charged as well, if we come.
And you've said before in cases like this, sometimes the girlfriends get worse sentences than the actual drug dealers because they have more information to give. Yeah, so obvious injustice. She, like the rest of these, obviously they should be pardoned, they should be released. This is an incredible injustice that Trump could right if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah.